This is chapter 13, The Keys. The storm was over. As I made my way back along the riverfront, I could see the dark clouds slowly moving out across the sea. Mern had shown me an easier path from the cottage, one that was a lot less muddy, and as I walked towards Chaplin's bookshop, my mind reflected on the fascinating story she had told us of Victorius de Aldeville and his daughter Elizabeth. I also smiled to myself. I was pretty sure that one of the books little Robert had found for me at Chaplin's yesterday was by Maria Catchpole. I must check out the story of the 5 keys. I noticed as I approached the bookshop that the front door was slightly ajar and the note had gone. I pushed against it and let myself in. Most of the books that had sat in piles in the middle of the shop floor had been clumsily pushed to one side and replaced by a large tin bucket. It made a ping, ping sound as water dripped rhythmically into it. The Chaplins had had a leak. There was nobody about, but I guessed that the large brown paper parcel tied with string on the desk was for me. "Be with you in a minute," said a man's voice from behind the hidden doorway at the back of the shop. "No problem," I shouted back, walking over to the desk and picking up the parcel. A minute later, a short, stocky man emerged from the back of the shop, clutching a glass of water and a couple of round white pills. He wore a checked shirt with the sleeves rolled up above his elbows, and perched on the end of his nose were spectacles with narrow metal frames. "I'm guessing that you're here to pick up the books," he said, pointing at the parcel under my arm. "Oh yes," I answered. "I came by earlier, but you were closed." "Sorry about that," he said, popping the tablets in his mouth and washing them down with a large gulp of water. "Headaches," he continued, tapping at his balding head. "Plus, we had a leak during that storm." "I noticed the bucket," I said. "It was a pretty bad one. Looks like it's moving away now, though." He nodded in agreement and opened up the drawer of his ancient cash register, which made a satisfying cha-ching sound. "By the way," he said, "Muriel, that's my wife, told me she'd thrown in the Catchpole history for free. The author is a local woman. I think you might enjoy it. I'm Mr. Chaplin, but you can call me Arthur." "Nice to meet you," I said, reaching across the desk to shake his hand. I had a sudden memory of my conversation with Muriel yesterday and hoped that she hadn't also thrown in pencil sharpness of the world, because I had no idea what I would do with that. I handed Arthur the cash for the books, thanked him, and was just about to leave when I had a thought. "Arthur," I said, turning back to face him, "this may seem like an odd question, but do you happen to know whether you are related to anyone that used to live at the old hall, the manor house on Monk's Ferry Lane?" He hesitated for a moment, frowned and rubbed a sore spot on his head. "It's not a part of my family history we like to dwell on, but yes, the Chaplins have history there," he said. "Ah, now that is interesting, because I was talking to Mern, the lady who lives at Priory Cottage this morning, and she told me," I began. sudden change of tone. "You're not a fan, then?" I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "As I say, the Chaplins have history," he answered, while at the same time forcefully tapping the desk a number of times with an index finger. "Now, if you don't mind, I have to clean up that mess." He pointed to the bucket in the middle of the floor, which was now near to overflowing. I nodded, thanked him again, and with the packet under my arm, quickly left the shop. I walked a little further down the road, past the newsagent's and the cafe. The pavement was still glossy with all the rain, and I had to dodge the little puddles of water that had collected in some of the cracks. I really didn't understand Arthur's hostility to the Aldervilles. I supposed it must have something to do with the Alderville family's arranged adoption of Elizabeth to the Pikes, but that all seemed such a long time ago. Why would he still hold such strong resentment? There must be more to this story. I wondered whether Mern would know. Back at home, I made up the fire in the front room and placed the parcel of books on the floor in front of it. I lit the fresh kindling in the fire. It crackled as it began to take hold, and I held out my hands to warm them. Then I made myself comfortable on the rusty-coloured hearthrug and began to open the parcel. I'd forgotten how splendid-looking the Reverend Griffin's book was. Inlaid into the dark leather cover were patterns of peacock's feathers and roses. I ran my finger along one of the embossed feathers. Of course, I mused to myself, the peacock had been the symbol of the de Aldeville family, and then the Pikes. I thought about the fountain in Bert's garden next door, and wondered when Rachel and I might get a chance to see it. Then suddenly, and not for the first time, I was startled by the sound of loud chimes coming from the hallway. Once again I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Okay, enough is enough," I shouted, and picking myself up, I marched through to the hallway to confront the Pike family's grandfather clock. It stood there, silent and lifeless. I felt as though it was mocking me. Muttering curses to myself, I bent down and fiddled with the small brass key in the pendulum door. Perhaps I could tie the pendulums together with string or something. That might stop the random ringing. But the key wouldn't turn in the lock, so I removed it, pushed it back in and tried again. Still it wouldn't turn. Exasperated, I took the key out again and rubbed it on my jeans to clean it. I wasn't sure what good that would do, but anything was worth a try. As I was placing the key back in the lock, I realised that now, under my fingertips, I could feel some raised writing on the little barrel. I took the key into the front room, grabbed my reading glasses, and knelt down in front of the fire. I held the key close to the flames so that I could inspect the writing. I inhaled sharply. There, on the barrel, were the words H.H. 1873, E and J. Pike. was another shrill, ringing sound. I jumped again, and my heart began to pound, until I realised that it was only my phone. I reached over and picked it up. "Yes," I said guardedly. "Is that you, dear?" replied an elderly female voice on the other end of the line. It was my Aunt Frances. "Is everything all right? You don't sound like yourself." "Yes, it is me, Aunt," I said, regaining my composure. "Sorry, I'm fine. Thank you for getting back to me so quickly." I'd left Frances a message yesterday to ask her if she knew whether we had any family connection to the Aldervilles or the Pikes, though I hadn't told her about Rachel's seemingly random resemblance to a long-deceased stranger. That all seemed a bit too far-fetched a story to tell at the moment. "Well, dear, you know anything to do with family history piques my interest," she said. "Firstly, though, how are you both getting on in the new house? Did you get my card?" "Yes, we did, thank you, Aunt," I said, looking up at the pretty new home card sitting on the mantelpiece above the fire. "We're settling in well. Still lots of unpacking and cleaning to do, but we'll get there." "Good, good," said Frances. Then she paused for a moment. "Look, dear, I have to tell you that I've already spoken to Rachel about this matter." I was taken aback. "Oh," I said, "when did you speak to her?" "She rang me last night, dear. I think you'd just got back from a fireworks display," she said. "What did she say?" I asked. I was perplexed. Why hadn't Rachel told me about her chat with Frances? "She asked me the same question you had, whether we had any connection with her family of the name Pike. I told her straight away that we didn't. However, the name de Alderville also cropped up in our conversation, and I said to Rachel that that name does come up in our family tree. Indeed, I thought it curious that you both should end up back in the same town as some of our forebears." I was dumbfounded. "What?" I said. "Aunt, you mean we are related to the de Alderville family? Why have I never heard of this before? I would have remembered a name like that." "Well, I only discovered it myself last year when I was digging around in Uncle Alf's papers," she said. "I told Rachel that it's quite a distant relationship, but we definitely have de Alderville DNA. I must say, I was quite impressed that the family has some aristocratic background." I was in shock. I couldn't get my head around what Frances had just told me, and equally, I couldn't understand why Rachel hadn't mentioned it to me this morning. "Are you still there, dear?" asked Frances. Yes, sorry I'm here," I said, breaking my silence. "Did Rachel explain why she wanted to know?" "She said something about a project at work in the library, that she was looking into the history of the de Aldervilles. She said that their old mansion house lies just behind your new house. It all sounds fascinating. I'd love to come and visit soon," she said. "Yes, you must come," I answered absent-mindedly, now completely distracted by the revelation. I said to Rachel that I'd pop all the details that I have in the post. "I'm afraid using email is a bit beyond me," she said, and then hesitated for a couple of seconds before continuing. "But dear, I am curious. What made you make the move halfway across the country to Monk's Ferry? Unless I'm mistaken, it's not as though you have any modern-day connection to the town." I thought about it for a bit before answering. "Well, the town is small and friendly, and there's the river, of course, the lighthouse and the beach, and you know I love the sea. I suppose it suits me, and then we found this lovely house, and was strangely drawn to it. Well, I'm just glad that you've both found some peace and quiet after all the upheaval, said Francis. Yes, I sighed. Peace and quiet. If only she knew. Still unsettled by my aunt's revelations, I sat myself back down on the rug and picked up Maria Catchpole's book. I turned it over in my hands, but I was too distracted to concentrate and so threw it back down again. The book landed so close to the little brass key that it caused it to spring up into the air an inch or two. I picked it up and ran my finger over the E&J Pike inscription on the barrel. I sighed, crossed my legs, and stared into the fire. So, we were related to the Aldervilles. How utterly bizarre. Did that fact now answer the question of Rachel's resemblance to Elizabeth Pike? And had I been somehow unconsciously drawn to this house, a place so intrinsically linked to the Alderville history? And was that why the stranger had turned up on our doorstep just under 1 week ago with his peculiar request? The thought made me shiver. I placed the key on top of Maria Catchpole's book, stood up and stretched. I needed to put the kettle on. A cup of tea might help me recover my equilibrium. A couple of hours later, and I'd made myself busy by doing a bit of cleaning in the kitchen and putting together a casserole. It would be ready by the time Rachel was due in from work at 7, and when she did, I was ready to have a serious talk with my only daughter. I still couldn't believe she hadn't told me about her conversation with Aunt Frances. I poured out a third cup of tea from the pot and snatched a chocolate digestive out of the biscuit tin and made my way back into the living room. It was now completely dark outside, so I drew the curtains and went to tend to the fire. It had died down somewhat, so I stoked it with a metal poker and added a few pieces of coal. I sat back down on the rug. The little brass key on top of Maria Catchpole's book shone in response to the revived flames of the fire. I moved the key to one side and picked up the book. It had a worn-looking brown hardback cover, and the dust jacket was missing. Inside there was an old Monk's Ferry library label, which indicated that the book had been withdrawn from the library's collection in 1996. I wondered how long it had sat in Chaplin's bookstore, waiting to be bought. Monk's Ferry, from the Romans to the Victorians, I mused to myself, as I turned to the title page and took a bite of my biscuit. The contents page revealed chapters on the arrival of the Romans to the area around 71 AD, and the establishing of the Benedictine Priory around the 12th century. All very interesting stuff, but Mern had said there was something in the book about the 5 keys. I turned to the index at the back. I scanned the entries on decay and found what I was looking for. It read, Keys, the 5, Legend and Shipwreck, Public House, page 63. I turned to the page. Under a section titled Local Legends, I read, on the 31st of October 1643, 2,000 troops, Monk's Ferry coast. On the second night, the force of the storm drove the ship onto the rocks just beyond the town's bay, where it was smashed to pieces. All hands were lost, including the captain of the galley, Patrick Burke. It was rumoured at the time that the ship was also carrying a number of chests containing jewellery, gold coin and plate, donated by English colonists for the king. Legend states that 2 of these chests were discovered by local fishermen after being washed up on the beach and hidden somewhere amongst the ruins of the town's former Benedictine priory. The story of the shipwrecked treasure goes cold until it's picked up again in the mid-18th century, when rumours spread that the then Lord of the Manor, Guy de Aldeville, had sold some of the golden jewellery from the Portiners, which he mysteriously had in his possession, to finance the building of an elaborate courtyard garden in the grounds of the Old Hall, formerly known as de Aldeville Hall, replete with fountains, urns and statues. Servants employed in the service of the de Aldeville family spoke of 5 brass keys on a brass ring, which hung suspended in a glass case in the drawing room of the hall for 60 or so years. The keys, they said, had been fashioned by Guy de Aldeville to unlock a case containing the remaining shipwrecked treasure, which was safely hidden somewhere in the grounds of the hall. It is unclear whether the story is true or mere local fantasy, and the keys, if they ever really existed, were lost to history, as was the treasure they were meant to unlock. Interestingly, however, the story of the keys was so well known amongst the locals of Monk's Ferry that a coaching inn on King Street was renamed the 5 Keys at the beginning of the 19th century. Before I had chance to process the information I'd just read, I heard the front door open. Rachel came into the front room, dragging her large bag behind her and looking a bit bedraggled and sorry for herself. She removed her coat and threw it on the couch. "You're home early," I said brusquely. I couldn't disguise the pent-up irritation in my voice. "Headache," she said. "I'm going upstairs. I need to lie down." "Did you get my text?" I asked, as she was about to leave the room. "Oh, yeah," she answered wearily. "Amazing news about the key. Great find, Mum." "What's that smell? Are we having casserole?" I ignored her question, stood up and walked over to her. "I had Aunt Frances on the phone just before," I said crossly. "Oh," she said, looking down sheepishly. "Then you know." "Yes, I know," I scolded. "Why didn't you tell me that you'd spoken to Frances?" "Look, Mum, I'm tired. I have a headache. Can we do this tomorrow?" she said with her eyes still lowered. "Well, I suppose we'll have to, won't we?" I snapped, and strode out of the room. I went through to the kitchen and noisily opened the oven to check on the casserole. I heard Rachel slowly ascend the stairs. Then a minute later I heard her coming back down again. She came into the kitchen and leant against one of the worktops with her arms folded. "Can I have a cup of tea?" she asked. Without replying, I took a mug down off the rack and threw a tea bag into it. Then I turned to face her with my own arms folded. "Have you taken anything for that headache?" I asked. She nodded a yes and looked down at the floor. "Look, Mum," she began, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the de Aldeville thing. I was in as much shock as you probably are. But I wanted to hear what Mern had was just a coincidence, she said crossly. And obviously it's not a coincidence because we're both related to the whole damn lot of them. Rachel, watch your language, I scolded. She flung her arms up in the air in frustration. You see, I can't win. I came back downstairs to apologise, and I'm still spoken to like a child. I lowered my voice. I'm not treating you like a child, Rachel, I said slowly. We both stood in stubborn silence for a few moments, until she spoke again. Am I going to get that cup of tea, or what? She said, pointing to her empty mug. I bit my lip and filled her cup with boiling water, and then began mashing the tea bag inside with a teaspoon. Look, Rachel, I don't want to keep falling out. Thank you for your apology. As you can see, I'm not flipping out over this, I began. I think you just did, she said, interrupting me. I didn't answer. Instead, I handed her the mug of tea, which she accepted with a sullen thanks. We stood in silence again. All of a sudden, she looked straight at me, or past me, I couldn't tell. What's that? She said. What's what? I answered, scanning my front to see what I'd spilled on my cardigan. No, out of the window, she said, moving behind me to the kitchen sink. She peered out of the window at our darkened yard. I turned around and stared out too. What did you see? I asked. A light, a flickering light through the trees, coming from the direction of the old hall, she whispered. Then turning to me with wide eyes, she said, Mum, we've got to check this out. Now. Thank you for joining me for chapter 30 of my ghost story mystery. I will be back very soon with chapter 14. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying, I shall see you very soon.